And to talk you through the guide, I'm very delighted to introduce Miss Julianne Norman, who is the author of the guide, which is helpful. She's also the project manager on the Science of Teaching programme. She is a research education analyst at RTI International. And most importantly, she is the only person in the RTI Science of Teaching team who hasn't come down with COVID in the last 3 days. So she is a machine.
Let's just hope it stays that way.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I see some familiar faces and some new ones, so thanks again for everyone who's been a part of all of our online events throughout COVID. I think this may be our 6th or 7th launch, and it's really great to have it in person. So I'm one of several authors of this guide. It definitely took an army to put together. And I am excited to walk you through the different building blocks that we have identified for creating an effective remediation program. But before we discuss the guide, I just want to get all the wheels turning and pistons firing. And we're going to go to, on your screen, you'll see menti.com. You can just type it into the URL in your cell phone Safari browser. And the code to access is right there. I'll read it out loud, 2136-2607. And when you pull up the Menti, it will ask you what words come to mind when you think of the term remediation. And you can write down 3 different words. It should have 3 boxes there. And I just want to see what words come to mind. It's going to create a little word cloud right here.
507.
All right. So I see catch up a couple times, repeat, deficit, acceleration, accelerated learning, learning loss, catch up, equitable learning, reinforcement. Oh, I like that one. Bridging, improve, response to intervention. Someone's read the guide. Equity gaps, fixing. Catch up is really big. And it really would be bigger, except we have a hyphenated version and a non-hyphenated version. Help, deficit. Okay, great. So that exercise did exactly what we wanted it to do, where we wanted to show the different terms that are often conflated with remediation and that often have similarities with remediation interventions, but it's not quite remediation itself and how we're defining it here. So we define remediation as additional targeted support concurrent with regular classes for students who require short-term content or skill support to succeed in regular formal programming. And on page 2 of the guide, we've actually listed, you can see the little box down here, a list of a lot of the terms that you saw come up in the word cloud that are really similar to remediation, but not quite how we're defining remediation. So now that we've determined how we're defining remediation, I want to take one step back, and before we actually go into the 7 building blocks that we have identified for creating a remediation program, I want to take a quick look at its connection with assessment-informed instruction, because you cannot have a remediation program that is not part of assessment-informed instruction. All remediation programs begin with good assessment-informed instruction. And as Alice mentioned, we do have a how-to guide. There are copies right up here. We have 2 on assessment-informed instruction, one at the systems level and one at the classroom level. And the one that I'm referring to right now is the classroom level. And we have identified 4 questions that should guide assessment-informed instruction. They're here on the screen. Why am I assessing? What am I assessing? What methods of assessment should I use to collect evidence of student learning? And the 4th, which is most important and related to remediation, is how can I use this information from the assessment and when will I do this? So this is where remediation comes into question number 4 about identifying struggling students and determining how you're going to support them. Okay, so now we can go back to the guide and discuss sort of how we created the guide. So I'm doing a walkthrough to give you an idea of what is in the guide and how it's laid out. And then we'll have a panel discussion afterwards to talk in a little bit more detail about country context and the project-specific examples. So this guide is based on a literature review on remediation. There's copies in the back. And the literature review examined models of interventions that have evidence or appear promising. So most of the examples that we use and on which we have built our building blocks come from TARL interventions, with a capital T, teaching at the right level, from Protham. Variations on TARL, response to intervention, which is a model used in high and middle income country contexts, as well as various tutoring models. And we've taken lessons learned from each of these interventions and distilled them down into what we saw as 7 core building blocks, things that you can't do without when you're building a remediation program. And we are going to jump into that right now, to the first building block, which is assessment to inform remediation. So not to be confused with assessment-informed instruction, but specifically looking at assessing students to understand their competency level, to have a sense of the knowledge of where they are in their learning trajectory. So before beginning a remediation program, students really need to be screened to identify the specific need for remedial support and their competency level. And our guide discusses 2 different types of tools for screening and assessing students. And it's also guided by 4 different questions. So we're talking really about selecting the right assessment. We have general outcome measure assessments and mastery measure assessments. And I think we can go ahead and click on the next one here. Great. So when you're thinking about the right assessment to screen students, we have 4 guiding questions that you see on the screen. I won't read them. You can see them. And at your table, there are 2 envelopes. One envelope contains examples of mastery measures, and another envelope contains examples of general outcome measures. And you can go ahead and open them and take a look and start to see and think about how these 2 different types of measures address the questions on the screen. And you'll see that the general outcome measures, there's a screenshot of Tangerine with an EGRA. And this is really kind of a longitudinal measure looking at students' progress against an overall curricular goal or long-term goal versus the mastery measures, which is really choosing to see if students have mastered a specific skill level. Yes. And so we just wanted to highlight what different types of measures are and the importance of selecting the right tool to assess children. Just give it a second to look. All right, so then, once you have assessed students and you have identified those who are in need of remedial support, it gets to step number 2, or building block number 2, which is all about grouping students based on their competency level. I'm just going to click one more. Perfect. There we go. So grouping students based on their competency level, rather than by their age or their grade. This really ensures that you're able to provide the correct targeted support where students are at their current competency level again. We note in the guide that small groups are best when you're grouping students, usually between 3 to 6, and trying to really reduce the teacher-student ratio, even providing additional teacher aides to really provide as close to one-on-one support as possible. And then having specific activities, which will be the next building block, that focus on the core skills that group needs to focus on before returning to class with their peers. And the guide provides different examples from TARL interventions and derivations on TARL as well. And I encourage you to read those at your leisure. All right, so for building block number 3, we move on to core skills. So we've highlighted this in the guide, and I want to reinforce it here, that a remediation program should not be designed to replace poor core instruction. Rather, it's an opportunity which should be a part of a regular foundational literacy and numeracy program to help learners and those who are struggling the most to acquire the foundational skills that they need through targeted instruction that is tailored to their individual competency level. So in the guide, we've highlighted examples of core skills for both numeracy and literacy. And these all align to the Global Proficiency Framework, which is a really good resource that articulates core skills for the early grades, kind of on a continuum. So also at your seats, there is another envelope, and just making sure that there is an envelope at your seats. And in that envelope, we highlight examples of activities from TARL that focus on certain core skills of various levels. There's a few literacy activity examples, like letter sound knowledge, and decoding. I think there's a numeracy activity in there that's about place value. And so these are Tarl-inspired activities. That's just a model of specific targeted activities that focus on core skills at a certain level that was based on assessing students who were at that level. And then, so those were some examples from Tarl's approach to teaching core skills. That's what's in your folder. And there's several different examples throughout the guide, and we've also hyperlinked to specific manuals from which we found the activities in the guide as well, in case you want to see more. But another model that we wanted to highlight as far as teaching core skills goes is the response to intervention approach, which we mostly see in high and middle income countries. And response to intervention has 3 different tiers. So in tier 1, I think there might be a diagram up here. I'm going ahead, and so these were the examples, sorry, from your in your folder. So response intervention, exactly. So we have 3 tiers here. You have tier 1, which is a little bit more like differentiated instruction. Tier 2, which is most similar to the Tarl model and really looking at the remediation that we're discussing. And then tier 3 is more one-on-one specialized support. So we discuss a little bit about this model and how they've grouped students, and we're really looking at the middle run here. So, all right. Then so now we've discussed the first 3 building blocks, which is assessment to inform remediation, grouping students based on their competency level, and then a focus on core skills. So the next one is training for teachers and what we call leaders of practice. And we really like to emphasize in the guide that regardless of who gives the instruction, there should be a dedicated group of people to do so. So it's important, whether it's a volunteer, a teacher assistant, a government official, that there is a dedicated person to provide remediation, and that this person or these group of people are trained and are provided consistent mentoring support. It's absolutely key. They should be supported throughout the entire process, which is very similar to a regular foundational literacy and numeracy program where you have coaching and mentoring support to teachers who are providing classroom instruction. That's quite similar to remediation, where whoever is providing that remedial support needs to have systemic support along with it. And we provide several examples throughout the guide of different ways to identify those who can provide remediation support and also how to support them, as well as some really interesting case studies. I'm just moving a little quickly because I know we're short on time. So let's go to number 5. The next building block that we have identified is that dedicated time outside of class for remediation is absolutely critical. For some of the programs that we've walked through in the guide, we don't know yet what is driving the change, but we believe it is 2 things, or one of 2 things at least. Either focused attention on students and additional time in practice for those students. So having a dedicated time to provide remediation is really important. And sometimes that is in school camps. There's quite a few examples from India of summer camps. There's another, TCIA Ghana did a really interesting study where they had 4 different ways of dedicating time for remediation, whether it's after school, pull-out classes, weekends. So we provide an example of that in the guide as well as some cost implications. So I encourage you to take a look at that example. So number 6 is monitored progress. And the important thing I wanted to highlight about this building block is that it is important to monitor students' progress throughout, because we want them to have the opportunity to move levels and to eventually graduate from a remediation program. We don't want them being stuck there the whole time. And so a good way to monitor progress is really vital for ensuring students continue to receive the support that they need and at the right level. So that's building block number 6. All right, we're on the home stretch here. Building block number 7 is government and community partnerships. No remediation program is viable without local government and community support on board. We highlight 3 particular reasons why this is helpful: allocation of time for remediation, ensuring alignment between core instruction, assessment, and essential skills, and preparing and supporting instructors, really ensuring that instructors and those who are supporting instructors actually have the resources that they need to do so. So this is three of what we found to be the most important reasons of why you really want to ensure that local government and community are on board with your remediation program. I think so. Those are the 7 building blocks. Again, you all have copies of the guide, I hope. And just to reiterate that when designed and implemented effectively, remediation can be a really valuable tool for increasing equity in student learning. And the building blocks that we've described in the guide can provide a strong foundation for creating an effective intervention. We really hope it's helpful. And I think to elucidate this a little bit more, we're going to have another Mentimeter and then an exciting panel for you. So thank you.